This is a GK Media podcast.
This podcast is part of the GK Media Studios Creators Network, helping people tell their stories. Become a storyteller today and learn about our podcaster network at gkmediastudios.com.
Andy Semotiuk, an immigration attorney who has 5 published books which are available on Amazon and has a wealth of experience. You've worked with over 15,000 clients. You've worked as an attorney in New York for 5 years, Los Angeles for 10 years, and you're now based in Canada. Thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks.
I'm very excited to be with you today. It's super that we're meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks. I know you have a busy period coming up as well with work and everything like that. So thanks for allocating time to talk to me today. We were talking about, the success of Garry Talks over the last number of months. And I was telling you that there's kind of 2 sections of our audience. There's the people who are in business and are looking for little insights on where they can improve, get growth, sometimes have that reassurance when things seem a little bit glum and dark. But there's also those people as well who very much feed off the stories of those in life who have been up against the wall. It looks like complete failure, but they've prevailed, they've been persistent, and they've managed to achieve success. And you have a wonderful story about your aunt.
Yes. So for those people who enjoy a success story, I've written a book about my aunt. Her name is Solomea Krushelnytska. Now, I suspect that not many people will have heard of that name who are listening here today. But I'd like to tell a little story about her because she was at one time the world's greatest soprano opera star. And the story relates to her involvement with the opera Madame Butterfly. Now, for those who are not in the opera world, Madame Butterfly is one of the top operas of the world to this day. Yeah. But this story dates back to 1904 when the opera was first staged. And why I'm telling it to you today is it's actually the 120th anniversary of the successful performance of Madame Butterfly, first time on successfully performed. And a little bit about that opera. The composer of the opera was a guy named Giacomo Puccini, who may be familiar to those who are sort of involved in the opera world. But he was a great composer back in those days, and he had been already successful with several operas, and he was looking for a new opera to put on. And he didn't have any ideas, so he took a trip to London. And while he was in London, he attended a play. And it was a play based on the story of Madame Butterfly. And the story is basically that this geisha girl in Japan in the 1800s, when Japan was being opened up by the American Navy, met this guy Pinkerton, who was a sailor, one of the in the Navy, an officer in the Navy. And they had a romantic relationship. And indeed, it went so far as they went through a form of kind of Japanese wedding, a marriage. And following a little sort of tryst together, Pinkerton announces that, I have to go back to the United States. They're calling me back to the United States. But, he says, I promise you I'll return to you. And the geisha girl, her name was Chiyo-Chiyo-san, which is butterfly in Japanese. Chiyo-Chiyo-san decided, okay, she'll wait for him. And he departed, not knowing that she was pregnant and that she was about to deliver his son. And indeed, she did deliver the son. And she waited for Pinkerton to come back. She waited years faithfully for the day when he would return. And indeed, he did return 5 years later, the son now a 5-year-old boy. But with Pinkerton comes back with an American woman in tow. It's his new bride. So a crisis develops between Chiyo-Chiyo-san and Pinkerton over what is going to happen with the boy. Should the boy stay in Japan with a geisha girl, or should the boy return to the U.S. with his father and the new bride? And they decide it's best for the boy to go back to the United States. And in one of the final episodes, or one of the final scenes in the play and in the opera, Chiyo-san pulls the boy off to the side, and she says to him, just as he's about to leave, she says, "Look at this face. It's the face of your mother. Remember it. You'll never see it again." And after that, he leaves with the father, and she cries out and eventually commits, Garry kills herself, suicide. That's how the opera ends. Well, when Puccini saw that play, he was determined that he's going to get the rights to that play and he's going to do the opera. So he went and talked to the playwright and enthusiastically grabbed them and said, "I got to have this, the rights to this play," and he got them. The playwright wrote, "When emotional Italian grabs you by the collar, insists that he wants the rights to your play, you have to sign the contract." He got the rights, and he was so confident about the opera that he wrote and composed that he had a premiere at La Scala, which was back then the greatest opera theater in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike any other premieres that he had, he decided to invite his family for this one, his son and his sister, to attend the premiere, because he was just so confident that this would be such a great opera. But that night, when they put the opera on that night, everybody was nervous backstage. He had collected a few of the top singers of the day back then. A lady named Storchio, who was the lead singer, not my great aunt, but Storchio, and a guy named Zenatello, who was a great tenor, and a cast of others. But they were all nervous, and they all sensed that it's not going right. And indeed, as they started performing the opera, the audience, the opera was jittery, and they were unhappy, and they started calling out things. One guy called out "La Bohème, La Bohème," meaning this is just a replay of La Bohème, and guys whistled, and it was a ruckus through the whole performance. So that when they finally landed the thing, when they finished the thing, they were all down, and it just did not go well. And the next day, all the headlines in the newspapers: Puccini bombs, opera terrible, and so on.
Yeah.
So Puccini was just floored, just crestfallen. He didn't know what to do. So he thought about his friend, a guy named Arturo Toscanini, who was the great director back then, conductor, who was in Milan as well. And he thought, I'll go and consult Toscanini. Toscanini later came to the United States and was the conductor for the NBC orchestra years later. But back then he was in Italy. And when they talked, Toscanini said to him, "Look, there's only one person that can really help you save this opera, and her name is Solomea Krushelnytska, my great aunt." Now, at that time, Solomea had already reached opera fame. She was a mentor to Caruso. If anybody's in opera, they'll know Caruso. He was the Pavarotti of those days. She, knew Puccini and Toscanini and all the opera greats. And she had already performed in many operas and premiered in operas. So she was at the top of her game. To ask her to perform in this opera under those circumstances would be like asking someone like, I don't know, Julia Roberts to perform in a retake of a movie that just failed with Sandra Bullock in the lead role. But because she knew them, and she thought, I'll take a chance. And they agreed. Puccini and her agreed to work together to resurrect this opera. 1904, in Brescia, which is a town about 60 miles away. at the Teatro Grande, and they worked together for several months, rehearsing. She wore a Japanese kimono every day for several months to get into the role because she was already in her 30s and she needed to play the role of Chiyo Chiyo's son, who was a teenager. So it was a bit of a leap. And because of the rough ride that the opera had gotten before, they were very nervous about it. In fact, on the night when they staged it, 1904, the second staging, Puccini was chain smoking on the side of the stage. Like nervous. Everybody was nervous. Even the audience was nervous. What the heck's going to happen to this opera?
Yeah.
And they performed. They started performing. And luckily, Solomea, she had an enchanting voice. Her voice was crystal clear, beautiful voice. And within minutes, the opera audience was enchanted. And they started, applauding. And they started calling out for replays. Like back then, you didn't have instant replays. So what they do is when you finished an aria, the audience, play
it again, do it again.
Yeah, do it again. And then have to re-sing the opera together again. So they did that a few times. And the opera was so successful that at the end, Salami had to go backstage to drag Puccini out for applause. And the audience gave them 7 standing ovations for performing that opera. And they went from there all over Europe performing Madame Butterfly. Solomea performed the opera 100 times. And on the 100th time, she went to Puccini and she said, "Here's your script back. That's the last time I'm going to perform that opera." And it's been performed to this day. Puccini never performed it at La Scala in punishment for why it didn't go well at La Scala.
Yeah.
But he allowed it to be performed all over the world. And to this day, it's performed. And as I mentioned, it's the 120th anniversary right now of the opera. She knew 60 operas by heart. She could sing out any aria from 60 operas right on the spot and play it on the piano. She spoke 8 languages. And she was not just an opera star. She was what I would describe her as an athlete that was able to perform night after night various operas, one day, Man and Lescaut next day, La Boheme next day, Madame Butterfly, etc.
You've worked in immigration a lot over the last number of years, and we don't know the outcome of your upcoming presidential election. And I know your former president, Donald Trump, he had plans to deport 11 million undocumented immigrants. And I think you yourself had documented that the cost of that alone would be around $265 billion. And we don't know the outcome of the US election yet. And if Donald Trump does get reelected as president, well, he'll be aiming to do that. And you weren't only talking about the knock-on effect of the cost to the country, but also the ripple effect that would have in sending immigrants across the border into Canada and so on. What's the mood like currently in the United States, especially around the whole immigration area?
It's profoundly disturbing. We're reaching a kind of a boiling point. The stakes are so high, not only for America, but I would say for the world. Deporting 11 million people, I don't think it can be done in a democracy. It essentially would require a conversion of the country into something different than it is.
Yeah.
Fear. But I'll tell you something funny about it. Like I expected, I get a bunch of calls, Americans phoning, I want to get out, just in case, give me my immigration to Canada or elsewhere.
Yeah.
I did get some. sort of high-ranking people like professors, doctors, and things like that. But not that many. Not that many. One lady phoned me. She was Jewish in background. She said, I want to get out my whole family. I want you to take the whole family out of the United States. And I said, what's your concern? She says to me, I've been through this before. We've been through this before. Hinting back to, I think, Nazi Germany and so on. But most people, they're thinking about it. They ask me about it, but they're last minute deciders. Yeah. I'm afraid I'm in that category too. I don't make decisions. Like I try to postpone tough decisions to the very end and only do it when I think I got to do it.
Well, it's a big change for one to make, to leave their whole life behind and move to another country. So you would leave it to the last minute to the outcome, I guess.
Just on that theme, I have some. There were a lot of Ukrainians that left Ukraine because of the war. The invasion from Russia, and I had some in my office just yesterday. And we just applied for them to stay in Canada permanently. And the guy says to me, he says, well, there's been a lot of refugees from Ukraine now, but if they lose the war, boy, you're going to see a lot more coming out. Mm-hmm. And I looked into the statistics. I actually wrote article on it a while ago. There's an expectation, it's not me, it's demographers, that there would be likely about 20 million people, refugees coming out if the war went the wrong way in Ukraine. Wow. That's just one sort of, that'll affect you guys.
Yeah.
Not to mention potentially if Ukraine goes under, they'll start recruiting men from Ukraine into the Red Army. They'll take over the assets that they have there, and onward, soldiers out to the west further. Let's take a look at Lithuania. Let's take a look at Poland and so on, right? And we're into this NATO business. It's just, that's a danger. Trump has said, well, he can solve the war in 24 hours. Just surrender the country to the other, to Russia, and you'll solve it in 24 hours.
Yeah.
But that's let's surrender Poland to Hitler in 24 hours. So,
and do the Ukrainians feel that they will return back to Ukraine in the near future, or are they more downbeat about the outcome?
There are two strains. There's the hope. The ardent hope that they can return back, and they will. By and large, they're educated. They've got a very strong educational system, so they're quite educated.
Yeah,
and so there's the hope, and there's great confidence, even with despair, but still confidence that this war will end in their favor and that they will win militarily.
Yeah.
And then there are those that say, well, no matter what, I'm going to want to stay in Canada or the US, permanently. I've been uprooted, I've transferred over, and now it's time for me to build a new life over here. So there's two strains there. I would say at least about 50% would go back. There are people going back now, right now, Garry. I can't believe it. People traveling every day back to Ukraine. There's bombs falling all over the place, and they're going back, because I got business in Kyiv. I've got family in Lviv.
Of course.
I'll go, for 2 weeks, and they go back, having coffee, and bombs are falling, across the street. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's such a difficult situation for them. And it's not only Ukraine, like it's happening across Europe and the Middle East at the moment.
There are two dangers, two particular dangers I would draw to people's attention about the war in Ukraine. One is the danger of not respecting sovereignty and independence of nations. World War, we fought two world wars, in part over land boundaries. 50 million in the last war perished. 50 million. I thought we settled, the land boundary question. It's not settled.
No.
It's a very important thing. The other thing is a nuclear war. And the challenge is this. Ukraine had the third largest supply of nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union fell apart. Strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. And the nations, several nations got together and talked about what should happen to that, that collection of nuclear weapons. And they signed the Budapest Accord, under which Ukraine agreed to surrender the weapons to Russia in exchange for guarantees of its sovereignty from Russia, the United States, the UK, France, and China. So, in terms of nuclear deterrence, one direction you're going into is towards nuclear war, buildup of nuclear weapons and so on. The other direction is surrendering nuclear weapons, getting rid of nuclear, And unfortunately, we're going in the wrong direction on that.
What's life like as well between living in the United States of America and now living in Canada?
Interesting questions you're posing. The United States is very entrepreneurial. I love America. At the core, I love the ideals of America, and I love the lifestyle by and large. The entrepreneurial nature of Americans. That let's go do it. Let's go make $1 million or whatever.
Yeah, 100%.
That part of America I like, but there's a part of America, and even you think it's monolithic, but it's not. They got all kinds of Irish people. They got Italians, Jewish people, blacks, Mexicans, all kinds of people. But they say it's a melting pot. Well, it's not really well, maybe it is. The idea is bring everybody together, take the best of everybody's, and, go with that. If that meant that you blend everybody together and I don't know what comes out of there, that's not really the way it's working so well. I think what's happening, though, is like I've been at the Italian parade in New York, which is like fantastic. It's, like miles and miles down Manhattan of, all kinds of stores and restaurants and cafes. And it's just phenomenal. And that's just one little festival of all the festivals that they have in America. So that part I love. But there's problems. The big ones are they can't seem to get out of the Civil War and the legacy of the Civil War and the racist elements. The problem with how people are being treated, blacks in particular. That's one problem. And then there's this. You could spend a long time on this, but several things. That's one. Gerrymandering and election reforms are not happening the way they should. So these districts are being defined the way the guys want them, so that they get voted Republicans this way, Democrats that way. Wide disparity of wealth between the rich and the poor. The 1% and the others. There's no rehashing, sort of relaundering. It's the same people in there like for 50 years in government. And, there's no automatic expiry date on these people. That's some of the problems in the United States. Canada's better when it comes to cultural integration. We're not perfect in Canada. There are problems in Canada too with there's a legacy related to mistreatment of Native Indians in Canada that we haven't gotten over yet. But generally, multiculturalism is a kind of a philosophy that is guiding Canada's development. But it's not the kind of multiculturalism that's being criticized in Europe and thought of as dividing the country into, like splintering and, shooting each other kind of. It's a policy of. I think the guiding principle in Canada is this: this philosophy of, it's a philosophy from Zig Ziglar, who used to be a prominent speaker. You can get anything you want in life so long as you help enough other people get what they want. So if you see your community as part of a larger community, and if you see helping other people getting what they want as part of your working on what you want, that's a great way to develop a society. And I would say, by and large, there's a lot of that happening in Canada. And but they're not business-like in America. Like, business is slower in Canada. The money's not there like it is in the United States. And it's colder than hell sometimes in Canada.
So.
The winter. So,
but do you help people then as well if they want to? I know you work with celebrities and investors, but generally speaking, is the idea if someone wants to try and get that visa, that green card or whatever, to work in Canada or America,
yes,
that's where you help them out?
Yeah.
And how can you as an attorney help that just one can't do for themselves, if that makes sense?
I'll give you, here's a little thing, a little formula for, if you want to immigrate to the US or Canada, there are 5 ways to do it. And this might help clarify things. One way is marry your way in, or if you've got family that will sponsor you. So if you marry an American, that American can sponsor you, or Canada, whatever. Another way is study your way in, become a student. After you finish your studies, postgraduate work permit. After that, working towards a work permit, then ultimately staying.
Okay.
A third way is refugee. If you're being persecuted and you want out from your country, like Ukraine, or we mentioned already, or some parts of Africa and so on. A fourth way is work your way in. An example would be someone like you, for example, maybe because of your talents, you may be able to get a work permit because of we talked about your life before we were on the air, so I have a sense of your thing. But anybody who's got outstanding abilities is one way, or as someone who's working for a large company, for example, let's say, Microsoft. Yeah. If you're a manager of a Microsoft office in London and you want to move, or Dublin, and you want to move to New York or Toronto, there's an intercorporate transferee method of going over. And young people who speak English and have degrees, there are programs for such people to come and get work permits and then ultimately work. And then the final way is invest your way in. If you have, let's say, I would say $350,000 US, let's say, as a kind of a rough gauge, you can probably find a way of coming to the US or Canada. Ireland in particular has some great programs for the Irish to come over. The Americans are fond of the Irish, so there's some special programs for the Irish there. There's that international visitor kind of work permit kind of a program for young people from Ireland, for example.
Brilliant. My dream then of one day maybe actually getting to work and live in the States could come true.
Yeah.
Talking about young people as well, I know you've written a book called The Young Professional, which is aimed at people kind of from postgraduate college, university, getting into the workplace. And I think, from even my own experience in college, when you're in that education / bubble system, it's very, very different than when you get into the work environment. And at the moment in Ireland, and I'm sure it could change globally, depending on how things play out over the next year or so. At the moment, there's more businesses looking for employees than there are employees available, and so on. So it's an employees market at the moment. That could change, obviously, if the economy changes. Yeah. But I think that makes it very interesting as well, where the power is in the graduate. They have more choices than, I suppose, myself growing up when the economy wasn't strong in Ireland. If you got a job, you were delighted and you worked hard to keep that job, But what sort of advice would you give young people entering the workplace environment?
Well, I'm going, because we talked about motivation
Mm.
earlier, you and I'd like to share a little bit about motivation, which is in the book, because I think that's a good theme, possibly for listeners. And I picked up this whole business of motivation myself from my participation in the Toastmasters International organization. You'll see just above me over here, there's a plaque on the wall. It's a Distinguished Toastmasters plaque. So I got up to the
Congrats.
very top. And what I did is I spent 35 years attending weekly club meetings where we talked, gave presentations, and had people criticize the presentations and tell us how to improve. Things like don't say every third word. Don't say
Or like.
Yeah. Don't walk around, stand. Don't waltz around. Things like that. Now, when I was in there, one of the things that I took an interest in was what was called the Golden Gavel Award. Every year, Toastmasters International chooses someone that they believe is a great speaker and invites them to a dinner where they give a Golden Gavel speech about how they became successful or, what's important to them. And at one of those presentations many years ago, he's long dead now, there's a guy named Bob Richards who gave his talk. And I listened to that talk. And how I came across it was I contacted Toastmasters and I said, hey, listen, I'm heavily involved here. I'd be interested in reviewing past recordings of people that you've recorded for the Toastmasters magazine, saying, hey, buy this audio cassette. It was audio cassettes back then. Audio cassette about this guy. It's a really great speech, and here's why, 1, 2, 3, or whatever. So they sent me a batch of these talks, and one of the talks was this Bob Richards. And this is what he talked about. This is what he said about motivation. He said that back then the country was in a malaise economically. Things were not going well. And some authors went around and started asking some economists, what do we need to get this economy moving again? And 3 of the top economists were all interviewed, and they all said the same thing. What's missing is motivation. Motivation. And then Richards went on to describe motivation. And he said, motivation, in my experience, Bob Richards, that is, can best be described by this story. When I was a young kid, Bob Richards, that is, he loved baseball. He was in a small town. They had a baseball team, and he'd go to the baseball games every weekend. And there was a guy at the baseball team named Lou Boudreau, who was a great baseball player. And that guy eventually ended up, I think, on the St. Louis Cardinals as a second baseman in the National Baseball League. But back then he was in the semi-professional. And so Bob Richards idolized this Lou Boudreau. And one day when he was at the baseball game, Boudreau hit a home run and Richards caught the ball at the far end of the stadium when the ball landed. And so he went to the players' dressing room after the game to wait for Lou Boudreau to come out so he could get his autograph. And of course, there were all kinds of little kids there waiting for their idols to come out. And Boudreau came out, and he went down the line, and he got to Richards, and he says, "Oh, what's your name?" And he says, Bobby Richards. "Oh, and what are you going to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a great ball player like you." And Boudreau says, "Oh, that's great, Bobby. Someday I see you're going to be really great. You're going to be really great." And he signed the baseball. And Richards said that getting some encouragement from someone like that meant so much to him. Someone, it was really meaningful. And then he went on to say that motivation is painting a larger picture of the life of someone than the picture they hold. And the moment of motivation is when that person grabs onto that larger picture for himself or herself.
Yeah.
I think that was really, that just knocked me over. I thought that was exactly right. And I think it's true today.
Yeah.
For young people, even immigrants, people who don't have jobs or are returning back into the workforce. If they're missing, if they're not confident about themselves or whatever, part of it is just getting that bigger picture for yourself.
I've never heard it described like that, but it's a really beautiful way of, getting people to really just see where they want to go in life. What would be the dream, feeling that they want to have or stature that they want to have, and get that clarity and then aim for it, work for it, make it happen.
Which is a theme in my book, which is, one of the things that I encourage people to do is focus on their unique ability, something that they're really good at. Do one thing really, really good. Learn how to do it really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was on a Chinese fortune cookie that I wanted. I thought, geez, that's brilliant.
But it's so important to embrace the uniqueness rather than trying to carbon copy what someone else has successfully done, because it's what makes you stand out is your uniqueness. You can bring something different to the table.
Yeah.
And again, for a young person, I would say, try and get as many different roles and jobs in the early years as you can, because that variety will stand to you 10, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, I agree.
Andy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Yeah,
thank you so, so much. As I said, Andy's books, he's published 5. They're available on Amazon Books. And if you want to get more information about Andy, you can head over to his website, pacelawfirm.com.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate it.